Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. Today's story is, want me to check every single one by hand? I will. Hope you're not in a hurry. One of my first jobs out of college was working for this small company that provided financial services. The place had a ton of problems, and most of them were because of the boss. I'll call her Cruella de Vil, because she was tall and creepily thin, with a pointy face, always wearing high heels and designer clothes. Cruella was wildly incompetent and would regularly yell at people and blame them for her own mistakes. She frequently took long holidays abroad and talked about giving lavish gifts to her 20-year-old boy toy. Not making this up, while also complaining about how expensive it was to pay us. She paid minimum wage and nobody ever got raises. She fired people willy-nilly for imaginary or perceived slights. She also played favorites with the staff, so a couple of her cronies could do whatever they wanted, and the rest of us were treated like indentured servants. Turnover was extremely high, and she had created such a toxic atmosphere that the only people working there were either F-ups who couldn't get any other job, or poor schmucks like me, who were desperate for any job, and would quit as soon as they found something else. Basically, the only reason why the place hadn't folded yet was that Cruella only showed up 1 or 2 days a week, and the rest of the time we trundled along without her interference. She was pretty much a cartoonish villain. I really can't overstate how bad her personality was. I can laugh at her now, but she used to scare the SH out of me whenever she started yelling at me from the other end of the corridor. I was young, and it was my first job, and at first it was my fault for being yelled at, and that I wasn't good enough. Anyway, the job itself was boring and menial, but there was a very important task that we did. When we received the physical copies of contracts from clients, we needed to scan the contracts, upload the scans to our internal database, then send the physical contracts to our parent company for archival. This was very important, because if a contract was lost, the client could default on their payments, and the company would lose money. A single lost contract could mean a loss of $5,000 to $10,000, and the parent company would treat it as a very serious incident and possibly launch an investigation. Of course, the company was very dysfunctional, and we were always losing contracts left and right. We all knew that some contracts were missing. It was obvious even to my untrained eyes, because the numbers of incoming contracts and outgoing contracts just didn't match up. But nobody dared mention it to Cruella, and she was too stupid to notice. This couldn't go on forever. One Thursday morning, Cruella yelled me into her office and demanded that I check all the contracts in the database to see if anything was missing. She was under fire from the parent company, because they were suspicious of discrepancies, so now she pretended like it was my job to check, and I hadn't been doing it. It was BS, because this kind of check wasn't in my job description. High responsibility, not something you'd let a new hire do. And nobody had ever told me I was supposed to do it in the 2 months I'd been there, but I still wanted to be a good employee, so I told her I would do it at once. She took a stack of printed sheets of paper from her desk and gave it to me. She said, "Here are the contract numbers for the past quarter. Look up every single one of them, and write down the numbers of all missing contract. But there are no contracts missing. It's impossible. But you lot are all idiots, so maybe something is missing. Hurry up. I need them by today because I'm leaving for Ibiza." I look at the stack of paper in my hand. It was maybe 100 pages long. And each page was a long list of contract numbers, maybe several thousand contracts. I quickly calculated that it would take me 4 or 5 days to go through that entire list by hand. Certainly it was impossible to finish in one day. Of course, when I tried to point this out to Cruella, she looked at me like I was an idiot and started yelling. "You just type this number in the computer, then look at this information here. Doesn't take more than 10 to 20 seconds. Stop being lazy and get to work." It was as if she thought that if doing it once takes 10 seconds, then doing it 1,000 times won't take more than 10 minutes. How stupid of me to think that the laws of mathematics apply to Cruella, who always knows best. At this point, I was fed up with Cruella and her unreasonable requests, but I was still trying to do my best. I know I was young and naive. It wasn't malicious compliance time yet. I went back to my office and tried to figure a way to truly complete the task in one day. After I had calmed down after all the yelling, it occurred to me that it was actually very simple. Cruella had told me to check the contracts one by one, because that's the only thing she knew how to do. Pretty much everyone in the office was computer illiterate, but I had access to a database and to Google, so after some trial and error, I found an online tutorial, and I managed to query the database and immediately see a list of all the missing contracts. I don't even have to worry about accidentally skipping a line or typing the wrong number, which would have happened for sure if I'd done it by hand. The entire thing took me less than 2 hours. There was a grand total of 22 missing contracts. Losing one would be bad. Losing 2 would be worse. Losing 22 was, yeah, I won't lie, I was kinda gloating at this tangible proof of how much Cruella had effed up. I printed the list of 22 missing contracts. Cruella didn't do emails, and I walked over to Cruella's office. At first she was gloating, like I told you it wouldn't take you long, you lazy moron. Then she saw the list, and her eyes bulged in her head. Immediately she started yelling at me that it was impossible and that I had made a mistake. I didn't budge, because even when I didn't believe in myself, I believed in solid data. And I had manually checked those 22 records, and I was 100% certain that those contracts were all missing. So she was yelling at me, and I kept shaking my head and saying this was the correct data that I got with my query. I'm pretty sure she had no idea what a query was, so the only thing she understood was that I hadn't done what she asked, manually check the records, and instead I had obtained a list of numbers through some dark computer sorcery. She yelled at me that I had not been given the task to hack her database and insinuated that my degree was fake. Not kidding. She threw the sheet of paper at me and told me that my task was to do it over, and properly this time. So malicious compliance now. I went back to my office and took Cruella's original 100 pages list of contract numbers. I hadn't needed it earlier because I figured I could just filter the records by date, but now I was forbidden from doing that. Can't hack the database, must do this properly. Very slowly I type the first number, wait for the page to load, check the contract, check carefully, because this is after all a very important task that Cruella set me. This contract is fine, so I take a pencil and carefully tick a check mark next to the first number. One down, several thousand to go. So at this point, Cruella was paying me to listen to podcasts. We were allowed earphones, while doing a task that was already completed, but with a slower and less efficient method. I had other tasks that needed to be completed, otherwise it would stop production. But I dropped everything else because Cruella had told me this was my only task. By lunchtime, I had finished maybe 3 or 4 pages. By early afternoon, Cruella started wondering what was taking me so long, and she was getting complaints that my other regular tasks weren't getting done. She came into my office and accused me of doing nothing. I pointed to my list that I was going through, and while she watched, I made a show of very slowly looking up a contract number and ticking it off the list. I could see now the gears turning in Cruella's head. She was realizing that she had set me an impossibly long task. She asked me about my list of 22 missing contracts. I said that I had understood it was full of mistakes, and so I had shredded it, and also deleted the files from the computer. She started yelling that she was going to Ibiza tonight, and I was being too slow. I replied that I was being very careful, because she had told me off for my mistakes, so I wanted to be sure it wouldn't happen again. Then she had a brilliant idea. She said I was too slow and stupid, so she would do the job herself. Of course, her idea of doing the job herself was, call every single employee into her office one at a time, give them a couple of pages of contract numbers, and tell them to check them and write down all missing contract numbers. She refused to admit that I had proven that a single person couldn't do the task in a day, so she figured she would get 30 people to do in a day, and that would show me. She gave me the most menial tasks of running around collecting bits and scraps of paper once everyone was done, and give it to her so she could put it into her list. She thought it was some kind of punishment for me, but at this point I didn't give an SH, and I just found it funny how she had stopped the entire office for a full 4 hours. Every time I gave someone their list of numbers, I made sure to say, in a very serious voice, make sure to be careful and take your time with this, because Miss DeVille says it's very important to make no mistakes. It was complete madness. She even had the receptionist doing this task, so calls were going unanswered, and the front desk was a mess. I felt sorry for the 2 or 3 decent people in the office who had been dragged into this mess, but the other employees were a-holes anyway. By closing time, Cruella had cobbled together her list of missing contract numbers. She showed it to me triumphantly, saying that there were only 19 contracts missing. Now, aside from the fact that she was trying to spin it like it was a victory, because there were 3 fewer missing contracts that I had said, her list was wrong. I had kept a copy of my own list, and later I checked it against Cruella's list out of morbid curiosity. Cruella and the other employees had correctly identified 18 missing contracts. 4 missing contracts had been completely overlooked, and 1 contract that was on Cruella's list was not missing at all. The last part was really ridiculous, because it meant nobody had double-checked the list. Otherwise, they would have found the contract in the database, and the error would have been evident. I didn't point this out to Cruella. I had not been given the task of double-checking her work. At this point, I had a bit of an SH-eating grin on my face, because I figured that the parent company would end up not only discovering how many contracts we lost, but also that Cruella didn't even know how to check. She was effed, but too stupid to realize it yet. Of course, she started yelling at me for that. Cruella, why are you laughing? Do you think it's funny that you wasted everyone's time for so many hours? Me, no, you were absolutely right, Miss DeVille. It was possible to check all the contracts by hand by tonight. Thank you for showing me. Cruella, don't think you're so clever. You know how many people want your job? I could replace you very easily. Me, really? Did you have many applicants for this position? Cruella, lots. Me, and were they qualified? Cruella, Yes, more qualified than you. Me. Wow, sounds like you should have given one of them the job, not me. Cruella. Yes, I could call any one of them, and they'd be willing to start tomorrow. Me. Good idea. You should probably do that. I'm giving notice. My last day is next Wednesday. At that, she was completely speechless and left. I never saw her again. She was supposed to be in Ibiza from Friday to Sunday, but I heard she prolonged her holiday. She wanted to avoid the people from the parent company, inquiring about their missing contracts. As soon as the parent company launched an investigation, they would find the list of missing contracts in no time at all. My replacement arrived on Tuesday, but I never talked to him. I pretty much hung around the office and watched YouTube videos for the last few days at that office, then walked out on Wednesday, and it was like a weight had been lifted from my soul. I was ready for some tough times, since I had quit my job, so suddenly without anything lined up and no chance of a good reference, but I lucked out and found a much better job before the month was over. I later heard that Cruella's company went bust, and she had to be bailed out by her family. The kicker? I just wanted my last paycheck, and to forget about Cruella, but Cruella's deputy manager, Jasper, told me that I would have to go in and sign some legal documents, saying that I wouldn't sue the company, otherwise they wouldn't give me my money. I told Jasper I had no intention of suing, and I just wanted what was owed, but he kept saying I had to sign. He said it was a legal requirement for my own protection, something all former employers were required to do. I couldn't have the money unless I signed, etc. Eventually I said, okay, I'll come in. I went. I used to live next door to a labor union. I went and asked for advice about getting my last paycheck, and 2 of their lawyers were in the building. Union rep called them over when he heard my bad SH story, and the lawyers couldn't believe it either. I showed them my contract and printouts of some emails with Jasper's requests. One of them said she'd do me pro bono. I think she just wanted to see the building full of crazies who had managed to avoid getting sued yet. I brought a lawyer. Jasper made a glorious OSH face, while I sweetly explained that since he had been so insistent on the phone, I wanted to make sure that we're signing all necessary documents and no mistakes are made. The lawyer basically took a look at the BS they wanted me to sign, quoted a bunch of laws, and said something to the effect of, my client's contract is very clear, and she doesn't have to sign anything. If she doesn't receive her paycheck by date, we'll sue you for breach of contract. That's right, unlike some people, I had not mislaid my contract. I got my money the very next day, never looked back. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you liked it, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.